Welcome to Bear in Mind. I'm your host, Chancellor Bob Berdahl. We're coming to you from our television studio at the University of California, Berkeley, where we're joined by a small audience of students, faculty, and staff. Bear in Mind, which also appears on the UC Berkeley website, is a monthly conversation with some of the most interesting and informed people here at the Berkeley campus. On this edition, we'll be talking to Professor Bruce Fuller about the effects of public policy on education, Professor Kristin Hanson on what's involved in writing a dictionary, and Boalt Hall lecturer and renowned author Ayelet Waldman on her latest novel. So stay tuned for this edition of Bear in Mind. Our first guest is Professor Bruce Fuller from the Graduate School of Education, who is co-director of a joint venture between the University of California, Berkeley, and Stanford, one of those collaborations that we don't always talk about between these two great campuses, but it's called PACE. PACE's primary aim is to enrich education policy debates by providing a sound analysis and evidence to California policymakers and educational professionals about the issues that they face in formulating education policy. Bruce, tell us a little bit about PACE. What are some of the projects that you have? How did it get started? What have you been up to with PACE?
Well, as you mentioned, Bob, we've been working with Stanford since 1983 on a variety of issues. We focus mainly on California policy issues, from charter schools to school finance to education reform. And we really do try to speak truth to power. We try to bring evidence to bear within the policymaking process. It's become a much more politicized process in recent years, but we're faithful that evidence and mainly social science research can inform policymakers. Well,
it seems as though nearly every governor declares that he is going to be the education governor. Certainly that was true of Gray Davis. It's also been true of Schwarzenegger and his campaign. If we have so many education governors, are we making any progress on the improving of public education?
Yeah, I'm trained in political sociology, so I try to figure out what's making these guys and gals tick in politics. And clearly the force of suburban voters, mainly women who don't identify with a political party, they tend to really try to figure out the issues and the motivations of politicians. They don't just pull the lever for Democrats, Republicans. Those suburban female voters are, in a sense, the swing voters that are encouraging politicians to focus more on education, child care, child health, issues like that. So everybody does want to become an education governor. We now have someone who wants to be an education president. So we also see this competition between levels of government in terms of who can be tougher on schools or who can be the leader in school reform. So the politics, I think, encourage this very strong attention to public education, which is good in some ways, and in other ways it politicizes issues, as we've seen recently with the No Child Left Behind Act and presidential candidates pushing back, saying, no, this is not the way to reform schools. So the politicalization of education is a mixed bag.
This is the second anniversary of the No Child Left Behind Act initiated by President Bush. How do you think that's going?
Well, we just had the 2-year anniversary of No Child Left Behind. It was passed 2 years ago this January. Personally, I think it's a well-intentioned strategy. It's come out of about 15 or 20 years of thinking in the policy arena to define clear learning outcomes for schools, to have more of a common curriculum, and then to let schools pursue their own strategies for raising the bar and for bringing kids up to these higher performance levels. I think it's run into two big problems. One is a lack of funding. It is an unfunded mandate. California faces a cost of around $1.8 billion a year to implement it, but only gets about $400 million from the federal government to implement No Child Left Behind. So the unfunded mandate makes governors around the country quite nervous, especially as this administration has tried to reduce aid to state governments. The other big problem is just sort of this regulatory morass that it's created, where some schools have 20, 25 different hurdles to clear to pass their performance objectives set far away in Washington. And it tends to be demoralizing for local educators in the sense that they have all these hurdles to jump over. They don't quite know what they're supposed to do to succeed in this new system. And it is ironic that a conservative president would press so heavily on a very top-down regulatory mechanism to try to boost achievement scores.
What do you see as the primary problems that California schools are facing? We know they have a big shortage of funds, but what beyond that? We've heard a lot about certified teachers and things of this type. What do you see as the kind of issues that in fact the governor could grapple with, assuming that he had the resources available to him?
Well, first of all, Bob, I think it's important to recognize we've made a lot of success in the state over the last 25 years. Certainly our test scores have been up and down, but in terms of school finance reform, we've equalized finance. Steve Sugarman, Jack Coons, two law professors here on campus, really spearheaded this drive in the 70s to equalize school finance, and they were largely successful. So we have very equal levels in spending across the districts. One of the big problems, though, is we have enormous inequities within school districts. So if you look at the schools in the Oakland Hills, for example, they're much better resourced. They have cleaner facilities. They don't have broken windows. They have credentialed teachers. But the Oakland schools in the flatlands are radically under-resourced. And this is a complicated problem. It involves collective bargaining agreements. It involves politics within districts. It involves mayors who don't want to lose the middle-class population, so they protect the middle-class schools. And these are really complicated micro-political issues that are hard to get out of. But that's one big problem is inequities within districts.
Well, now, what role is PACE going to be playing in addressing these issues during this session of the legislature and in the months ahead?
Yeah, well, we do try to place some evidence on the table. Governor Schwarzenegger is also very committed to decentralizing schools, giving local schools more authority, more power. Trying to move some of the power away from Sacramento. But we have been through this experiment before. I think PACE's role in part is to provide a historical perspective on this, to go back 10 or 12 years when we tried this before in California. It didn't necessarily yield dramatic results. We're also doing a lot of empirical work on charter schools, on school choice schemes.
What's the report on charter schools?
It's mixed, Bob. On the one hand, it's created, I think, a lot of positive energy and a lot of sparks in the California school system. We've got about 480 charter schools around the state enrolling.
Well, as you know, we're talking about starting one here and have received a big grant from the Gates Foundation to launch this effort.
Yeah,
so.
I think it's potentially very, very exciting. The downside empirically that we're finding is that the resources across charter schools basically mirror the resource inequalities across regular public schools statewide. Okay. So you have charter schools.
So you have some of the same funding problems.
Exactly, yeah, and just the wherewithal of actually getting a school going. I think we're seeing this with the committee here on campus. It just takes a lot of organizing, a lot of smarts, a lot of chutzpah to kind of get the whole effort together and to sustain a very innovative school.
Well, I think that this is an extraordinarily important initiative, and PACE is, I think, contributing enormously to the efforts to solve our problems. There's probably no problem that is more important that we solve than the education of our children. That's the most important thing we do as a collective, it seems to me. So I'm very grateful to you and your colleagues at PACE and to your colleagues at Stanford for the efforts that you're taking to address this problem.
Well, thanks, Bob. This campus has supported PACE for 20 years, too, so we're of course, grateful to for that support as well.
Well, thank you, Bruce, for being on Bear in Mind.
Thanks.
That was Bruce Fuller, professor in the Graduate School of Education, co-director of PACE, here on Bear in Mind. Most of us have at least one dictionary on our shelves, and need to consult them from time to time, even when we're doing things other than playing Scrabble. And although we may use it quite often, we don't often think about how a dictionary gets created. And some years ago, our next guest, Professor Kristin Hanson, a linguist specializing in the relationship between verse forms and grammatical structures, actually worked as a contributing editor to the American Heritage Dictionary. And this semester, she brought to a freshman seminar a class entitled Reading the Dictionary. Kristin, welcome to Bear in Mind.
Thank you.
Tell me, what did a class on reading the dictionary involve? How do you read a dictionary?
Part of the motive for the class comes out of a different course that I've taught at Berkeley, which is History of the English Language. And I've been struck by how much information is just at students' fingertips that they don't really know how to access, because dictionaries include a wealth of information about not just how to spell a word or what it means, but their etymologies and contested points of usage and so on. And students don't typically know how to use that information. And so I was interested in the fact that when you buy a dictionary, it includes front matter that almost nobody pays attention to, with essays about how the entire system of Indo-European roots from which many European languages, words have been derived, have been reconstructed, and what the information in a dictionary entry can tell us. So I was interested partly in just getting freshmen to be aware of these resources that they have and what's in them. But I was also interested in the fact that they are treated as extremely authoritative documents, these big fat resource books. But they are created by real people doing real research and thinking about issues that are sometimes themselves contested. So I thought it was interesting for freshmen to think about the question of where these authoritative rulings had actually been taken from in terms of human thought.
Well, when you were an editor of the American Heritage Dictionary, what kind of issues did you have to deal with?
Well, usage generally refers to a very small segment of contested issues in the language. So most of us speak with complete control of the grammar and vocabulary of our language that we've learned since we were children. But there's always a hardcore of issues that raise questions of what's the correct way to use this or that term. And often people think in terms of there being a correct way that they want to know about so that they don't embarrass themselves or get something wrong. But it's precisely the issues that are contested where there's often an interesting intellectual issue at stake. So some of the most salient issues of that kind for our society have been questions of, say, sexist language. Like, that's just one where everybody thinks about it because people use a suffix like S on ambassadress and people are instantly irritated. But it's not such
We don't even use actress anymore, it seems to me.
Well, exactly.
Women are now actors.
That's true. And it's a great example because going back to the question of how a dictionary is produced, one of the things that went into producing the American Heritage Dictionary and the notes on these contested points is a survey of their usage panels. So they have a group of, I forget how many, over 100 noted writers and so on who get sent a questionnaire about what they think of certain issues. And
so there's actually a kind of polling about
that's right,
usage.
They're polled. And part of that is that one of the reasons people buy dictionaries is to know how an educated person might react to a certain form.
You're an expert on verse forms and grammatical structures. Tell us some of the other courses that you teach and what verse forms and grammatical structures refers to.
Well, my specialty is meter. So just like contested issues of usage, it's a very old-fashioned aspect of the English language. Iambic pentameter that everybody sort of learned about in school is what I study. And my interest in it is partly a theoretical interest about how a verse form like meter relates to grammatical structure. And what I mean by that is that everybody who knows a language has intuitions about, that they've had from the time they learned the language, about what the grammar of that language will permit and what it won't. And the grammar of every language has a grammar for its rhythm as well. We know not just where stress falls on a word that we encounter, but also what's possible and impossible within the grammar of rhythm for our language. So we know not just that you can say abracadabra, but also that you couldn't say abucadabra. That just would be completely non-English. So one of the things that is interesting about meter is that it deploys the same kinds of intuitions about rhythm that go into a language in creating a verse form. And so I'm really interested in just how it is that in a given language, certain forms are drawn from the repertoire of givens of grammatical structure.
Thank you very much for being on Bear in Mind.
Thank you.
That was Professor Kristin Hanson from the Department of English on Bear in Mind. Fascinating. Our next guest, Ayelet Waldman, is a novelist who has written mystery stories and now has a new novel. She's also a lecturer at Boalt Hall, where she teaches a seminar on the social and legal implications of the war on drugs. She's the author of the very popular Mommy Track novels, a mystery series that include the titles Death Gets a Timeout, Playdate with Death, and Nursery Crimes. And recently, Ayelet has added to her accomplishments a new novel of a more serious vein entitled Daughter's Keeper. One wonders how she can do all of this while at the same time raising 4 children between the ages of 1 and 9. A marvelous kind of achievement. Thank you, Ayelet, for being on Bear in Mind today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Well, your mystery novels have a big following. In fact, my daughter was reading one when she was visiting here at Christmas time.
Oh,
so
wonderful.
you have a lot of fans as a mystery novel writer. Where do you get the themes for those? Where do you get the plots?
The murder mysteries they're very lighthearted. The stories involve there's a serious character, a mother who is staying home with her children and is sort of going mad while trapped in her house.
Is this drawn from some kind of personal experience?
No, not at all. And she was a public defender, strangely like her creator, and solves crime to keep herself entertained while home. So they grew out of this period in my life when I had left the public defender's office and I was staying home, and started writing them to kind of keep myself entertained. And I think they kind of hit the market at a time that there were a lot of women like me, a lot of ex-lawyers, ex-doctors, CEOs of companies who were finding themselves got straight from the boardroom into the sandbox and kind of going crazy. So there was a ready audience for people who were not necessarily all that fulfilled by making homemade Play-Doh, but nonetheless thinking that's maybe where they were going to be for the next couple of years.
Do you think ex-chancellors could write novels?
Oh, I'm sure they could if they, the ex-chancellor solving murders. Well, yes, you have to have a gimmick in the murder mystery category, so that could be your gimmick.
Well, ex-chancellors may be more perpetrators of murders
There
than
you
solvers.
go. I'm looking for a plot right now for a new one, so I could work in
all
if
right. Well, tell us about your new novel.
The new novel is actually on a much more serious vein. As I wrote more and more, I never actually expected to become a novelist. This was something I was doing to sort of keep myself from, keep my mind working. I expected always to go back to being a lawyer. And I was working at the same time. I was teaching. I've been teaching at Boalt now for 7 years. I teach 1 semester a year, and I teach this class on drug policy. But the more I wrote, the more I realized that this was something that I really loved to do, and that I wanted to do more with it. I wanted to grow as a writer, and that I wanted to start writing more serious fiction. And there was an issue that I was teaching about. I was teaching about drug policy, and I was primarily teaching about the sort of devastation wrought both legally and socially by the war on drugs. And I wanted to try to combine these two elements: this my interest in writing a more serious novel and my critique of drug policy. And I began with that idea. I began with the idea that I was going to write a searing indictment of the war on drugs. And I ended up writing a novel about a mother, because apparently writing about being a mother is all I can do, but that's okay. I'm just going to go with that. But I wrote a novel. Daughter's Keeper is about a mother and a daughter. The mother is named Elaine, the daughter is named Olivia. Olivia is in her early 20s, and she's a young, idealistic woman. The story takes place in Berkeley, and she has a boyfriend who is involved in a drug transaction. And because she's in the car when the deal happens, and the way the conspiracy laws are constructed in this country, if you're there when it occurs and you know what happens, if you're aware of what's going on, and if you take any kind of action to further the conspiracy, legal or not, she takes a phone message. You are as responsible for the crime as anyone else. The kingpin, the person who made the deal. So she is looking at the same crime.
Are people routinely prosecuted in that way?
And
yeah.
in fact, more people are prosecuted, more lower level conspirators are prosecuted than higher level conspirators.
Why is that?
Because people in the sort of lower tiers of the drug conspiracy have no information to trade. So someone in the higher levels of the conspiracy, they can negotiate with the government and exchange information for either a deal or for their freedom. And the people on the lower levels, they have no information to exchange, so they're the ones who end up being subject to the mandatory minimum sentences, and they end up being the ones who are forced to plead guilty to these long sentences because they have no way out. So 65% of drug offenders are currently serving time in prison, in federal prison, are the lowest level offenders. You know, mules who carry boxes, people who take phone messages, wives and girlfriends of the actual offenders. And Olivia is one of these people, and she's and the story is really the story about this mother and daughter and what happens to their relationship in the wake of this tragedy. But it also is an indictment of the system that prosecutes her and makes her as culpable as anyone else when she is really mostly a bystander.
That's, I won't ask you about the conclusion to this because we want our audience to read it, but it sounds like a really important theme and a very real kind of situation that I'm sure is faced quite often by families. And,
oh, absolutely. I mean, I think this particular thing is faced by families, but there's also sort of the broader idea when you have children. I mean, I think one of the reasons I wrote this in retrospect is because I think one of the major fears you have when you're a parent is that your children, when they are the age, when they're in their early 20s, late teens, they are at their most foolish. Their job when they're 19 years old is to make bad choices. I mean, that's what you're supposed to do. Only by making bad choices do you learn how to make good choices in life. But our biggest fear when we're parents is that our children will make a bad choice that will not end up being a choice that becomes, say, a youthful indiscretion that is one of many youthful indiscretions that is a step on the ladder that leads ultimately to, say, the presidency. But is a youthful indiscretion that leads to a lifetime of tragedy because it is something that we don't allow them to recover from. And that's one of my primary fears for my children, that we won't allow them to be redeemed. And I think it's a fear that all parents have. I did this long book tour around the country, and one of the most exciting opportunities I had was to speak with Orrin Hatch, Senator Orrin Hatch, in Washington. We sat down, just the two of us, and we talked about this notion of redemption. And
He's a very religious man.
He's a
one would
very
assume
religious man, and he's
that,
not a man with whom I thought I would agree politically. But on this issue of mandatory minimums, we absolutely agreed. And because he has this religious notion of the possibility of redemption, and he does not, and we were absolutely of one mind that this rigid structure does not allow, particularly a young person, to make a mistake and then to be redeemed. And that isn't a system that is, it's so at odds with what we as a country say that we believe in. And look, you know, I mean, I made a joke about this, but if our president is evidence of anything, he is evidence of the fact that people should be allowed the chance to recover from their youthful indiscretions.
Now, as a writer, you're also married to a writer,
Yes, I
Michael
am.
Chabon, who's a Pulitzer Prize-winning novelist
Yes, poor
himself.
dear, struggling in my shadow as he does. Yes.
Is that difficult for the two of you to carve out time for writing? Is there a...
We actually have what Michael and I both believe is the difference between a writer and someone who wants to be a writer is the actual act of getting your butt in the chair. That's what we say. Writing is a physical practice. You know, you sit down, put your hands on the computer, and you work. So we have a very rigid discipline. We get up in the morning, we get our 4 kids out the door, we make the lunches, we drive the carpool, and then we go together to a cafe. One of the reasons we live in Berkeley is because it's blessed with many, many cafes. And we sit side by side all morning and we work.
You do your writing in a cafe?
We do our writing in cafes around the city. Yep.
I would think writing was such a solitary kind of activity that whenever I've written, I've had to been doing writing, I've had to isolate myself.
Well, we can't isolate ourselves at home because the baby's there. We have a nanny who takes care of the youngest baby, and the phone rings, and there's the possibility of email and all this other stuff. And
why not have an office, but a cafe?
We have the office, but there's a little bit too much distraction. There's always someone who could like knock on your door. And the kind of hum of the cafe, it's noise, but it has nothing to do with you, serves to be a good distraction.
You're an inspiration, Ayelet, to a lot of budding authors, prospective parents, and you have really achieved an incredible amount as a lawyer, as a teacher, as a writer, as a mother. It's been a great pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
That was Ayelet Waldman, a lawyer, a teacher here at Berkeley, and a very popular novelist whose new novel is entitled Daughter's Keeper, which you can buy in the bookstores as we speak. Thank you.
Thank you.